All right, hey everyone. Today we're going to talk about a new century, and we're going to primarily focus on the election of 2000, which was so controversial. So our question is, what three candidates and their parties were running for president in 2000? Who won the popular vote and by what percent? What state determined the winner of the Electoral College, and describe the punch card system of voting? All right, so the 2000 election, one of the closest in American history. The Democrats are going to nominate the current vice president under Bill Clinton, Al Gore. Okay, and Gore's a former senator from Tennessee. His family is steeped in politics. His dad was a politician and a senator. And, certainly Gore has had a long history now of vice president. He's going to choose Senator Joseph Lieberman of Connecticut to be his running mate. Lieberman was older than Gore. So you have a sort of a younger politician and an older politician on that ticket. All right, the Republican nomination came between Senator John McCain of Arizona and George W. Bush, who would be son of George H.W. Bush. So certainly he understands politics. He's the governor of Texas and, of course, the son of a former president. All right, Bush is more popular among conservatives because he carries the party line much better. McCain was seen as someone who would just go off on his own and do whatever and not necessarily follow the party line. He's actually nicknamed the Maverick, and he often would vote very independent. Bush wins the nomination, so Bush is going to be the candidate for the Republican Party. He will choose Richard Cheney, an older gentleman who's had a even longer history in politics than these other two, and he will be his running mate for vice president. Cheney served as Secretary of Defense under George H.W. Bush in Operation Desert Storm. Cheney's got a long political history. Okay, so Ralph Nader is going to run as a nominee of the Green Party. This is an environmentalist group, or political party, I should say, and they're going to push, of course, environmentalist issues and anti-corporation agendas. Okay, so Nader's going to run. He knew he was not going to win, especially running against these two powerhouses, the current vice president and H.W.'s son. But he wanted to get his message out there, which was the whole reason for running. Okay, so I was teaching civics at the time. I had just started teaching in 2000. And I was teaching civics, and my students and I watched the election unfold. We're watching debates and things leading up to the election. And we also, the day before, did a mock election. Then that night, I had a club of students, and we all met at one of their homes with their parents, and we watched the debate, or the numbers coming in. And everyone, it was just so close. No one really knew who was going to win this election. And I came home. I finished watching. I probably got home about 8 o'clock, 8:30. Finished watching, or didn't finish, but I kept watching until I just had to go to sleep. And it was somewhere around 12:30, and there was still no winner called. Now, they did a brief thing where they announced that Gore won, and then they took that back. And then they announced Bush won, and then Gore even called Bush conceding defeat. And then 30 minutes later, he called him back and said, no, people are telling me that they're finding ballots where people voted for me, so I take it back. It was a mess. It was just a mess. So I woke up the next morning thinking definitely they'll have a winner. They definitely did not, and they're not for several weeks. It was just unbelievable. So Gore's going to receive the most votes, winning 48.4% of the popular vote. You remember from civics, popular vote is the vote directly from the people, whereas Bush got 47.9%. See how incredibly close that was. Nader threw a huge monkey wrench into this by winning 3%. So you had 3% to either of these guys. It certainly would give Gore that extra bump and would help Bush overcome Gore with the popular votes. So Nader really kind of messed these two guys up. It says, but nevertheless, the Constitution states that the presidency is not based directly on popular vote, but on the Electoral College system. So you should know that already. So to win the presidency, if you remember from civics, the number here should be 270 electoral votes. So the entire election comes down to the Florida vote because all the other states had kind of settled and everything hinged upon, like Gore Bush were neck and neck, and everything hinged upon who's going to take Florida, because Florida's polling, their system still had not figured out who had won their popular vote. It was kind of a mess because of their way of voting, which I'll explain in a minute. They carry with them 25 electoral votes. So whoever won Florida, since they were neck and neck, and that was the last state, whoever won Florida is going to win the election. Okay, so it says results in Florida were so close, a state law required a recount. And part of the problem was thousands of ballots had been thrown out because the machines could not read the intended vote of the voter. And I'll explain that in a minute. The machines are going to give the victory to Bush. Gore is going to say, no, 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 I want everything hand counted, recounted. So that delayed everything even more. Okay, so Florida voters had used a system called a punch card. And basically, I have a picture I can show you. And the punch card system is one in which you slide your ballot in, and then you take, it was almost like a pin attached to this portion, like on a string, but it had a little point on it, and you would punch out, like if you, in this case, it says Rod Shope. If you want to vote for him, you'd punch right here. And you would literally punch out a little piece of paper, and that would tell them who you wanted to vote for. And that little piece of paper is going to be called a Chad. The problem is people would punch, but not punch it all the way through. They wouldn't punch it out. So they would punch a little bit, slight punch, and it wouldn't come out. Or they would punch on one side of the Chad and not the other. So you had all kinds of different names that came up with it. Here's what I call this Chad. This is with a recount that Gore insisted upon. So this is an election official, and they had to hand look at every single ballot. And so he's looking, you see the punches on this ballot? So that's from the punch card system. The problem was the ones up top here are for Gore, Bush, or Nader. And some folks were, again, they would punch, but not punch all the way. Some of them would punch like Bush out, but then have an indentation on Gore. So the election officials had to determine who were they really voting for. So it was kind of a mess. Some of them were hanging on by one side, so the election official had to determine, did this person really mean to punch this one? Was it supposed to be punched out? I also had a picture of, let's see. Here's Florida. This is Florida cartoon. This is fascinating, like a train wreck. And you see Bush over here, Gore over here, and they're trying to pull Florida apart. Literally, everybody was watching. Everybody was watching that. Lots and lots of protests during this time. I mean, as this drug on and on and on and on, it's going to be all the media. Here's the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court gets involved. You see this lady's holding up a sign that says Soar Luserman instead of Gore Lieberman. And here's a Bush guy. Here's a lady pushing the Gore agenda. And this poster here, I would imagine, is probably a Gore person. Count all the votes. Okay, so just, again, sort of a mess. That's not what I want either. I can't find the picture that I wanted. But I think I've already shown you the punch card, yeah. Well, nevertheless, it was just a mess. And the hole they're punching out, I mentioned, is called a Chad. Some were partially attached. Some looked like no one had voted for anybody. None of them had been punched out. It was just difficult determining who the person intended to vote for. So all this counting by hand led to problems. Gore does take it to court. The Supreme Court takes over the case. The deadline passes on the recount. And the Supreme Court determines, in Bush v. Gore here, says Gore's lawyers argue that thousands of ballots still remained uncounted. On December 12th, the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that since different vote counters use different standards, the recount was unfair. In other words, a human being couldn't determine if somebody meant to vote this way or that way. So they're going to rule then 5-4 that there's not enough time left to conduct a manual recount that would pass constitutional standards. Okay, and that goes with my Bush v. Gore I was showing you a while ago. And that's pretty much the decision here, that basically we reversed the judgment of the Supreme Court of Florida, which allowed this recount to proceed. We're saying it's over. And therefore, they're going to determine that President Bush is the winner. So here is the final deal here. When they let those votes go through and they shut off any more recounts, Bush wins, you see, by such a narrow margin in Florida. So, therefore, Bush is the 43rd President of the United States. All right. So he's inaugurated. This is a kind of a cool picture to me because this is him at the inauguration. And here's President George Bush. Here's his dad, H.W. This is the first time we have a father-son both are president or have been president since John Adams and John Quincy Adams, which you know is early in our American history. Okay, so George Bush becomes our 43rd president. He begins his presidency by boosting the economy with a major tax cut, which is very Reagan-like thing to do. No Child Left Behind, I have a picture of that. That is required public schools to give annual standardized testing. So that's where we come up with the EOCs of old that students are tested with. Here's Bush with I can't get the no on there, No Child Left Behind. This one I really like, this cartoon, and it's the parents in 1960 yelling at the kid with his F. These grades are terrible. And then by 2010, when we have a full effect of No Child Left Behind, it's the parents and the kid yelling at the teacher. These grades are terrible, as if it's her fault. So No Child Left Behind really puts accountability on teachers and, really, really pushes them to get their students' test scores up, and teachers are judged based on their student scores. Okay, also Bush is known for adding prescription drug benefits to Medicare, which is one of his lasting legacies, and he also pushes the Reagan agenda of strategic defense. Once again, the Star Wars idea of developing missiles that would shoot down other nuclear missiles being aimed at us. Okay, so that's pretty much, here's that picture I was trying to show you, I think. And yeah, and you see here, I can't get all here, but Future of Nation is hanging by a Chad. And you see recount, and the O is a Chad. So it would be like if we were voting, we would punch, but it would still be hanging on. And they would call this the hanging Chad. And the election official had determined, did she mean to vote for this person? Did she mean to punch this out all the way? Some of them were attached on the side, so they called that the swinging door Chad, because it would, swing open and closed. Some of them were called the dimpled Chad, which meant it was attached at all sides, but there would be an indentation in the middle, as if the person voting tried to punch that out, but just didn't do it with enough force. This is the story of the 2000 election, the Chad. All right, so make sure you understand that. Okay, one last thing I want to show you. This is Christmas ornament. And in addition to me starting teaching in 2000, I also got married. So I want to show you, this is like a little scroll, like a time capsule. And someone gave this to us when we got married. And we're supposed to write down things that were happening that year when you got married. And what it says at the top is, it says, at that time, the news of the day was, and I put number 1, election of 2000, Al Gore Democrat versus George Bush Republican. Election results were not final until December 14th. George Bush was then determined as our new president. Florida had recounted for days. So it was really, really a mess, a historical mess. George Bush is going to come in during this time and then just a few months later be called to task at 9/11. All right, you guys go back and do the questions. I'll see you tomorrow.